Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining into this opportunity to learn together. Sorry if some of the color goes funny. I think we all know that this situation that we've been in with COVID-19 and not being able to be in shul and having to be at home all the time, or most of the time, is something that's going to give us more appreciation of the things that we took for granted. The fact that we could come together and be with each other and see each other is something we'll appreciate more. We should be appreciating more the fact that when we're able to be healthy and well, we should be very appreciative of that in light of what's going on around us. And therefore, we should take the opportunity also to thank Hashem for all these blessings that we have, and to thank Hashem for the fact that we're also able to learn and come together the way we are now, that we're healthy enough and well enough and capable of coming together. We have to thank Hashem for that and pray that the merit of our learning should be a merit for refuah shalema, complete recovery for all those who are not well, and that we should be able to that Hashem should save us from this plague, and we should be able to go back to our normal lives very soon with appreciation of everything that we have. So we have now begun the mitzvah of counting Sefirat, counting what we call Sefirat HaOmer, counting the Omer, where we count from the second day of Pesach until the holiday of Shavuos. We count 49 days until we hit the 50th day, which is Shavuos. And when Hashem appeared to Moshe in the burning bush, Hashem made it clear to Moshe that the goal is from Egypt, which was placed on Pesach. The goal was to get to Shavuos. The goal was to get to the point where we would receive the Torah. Hashem said to Moshe, "Vayomer yimach, I shall be with you. This is the sign. That I have sent you. But when you take out the nation from Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain." Hashem told Moshe right away, the goal of the exodus from Egypt was to come to a point where you can receive the Torah. That was the goal of leaving Egypt. Now, that took place 50 days later, which we call the holiday of Shavuos. And the fact that this worship would take place on the 50th day after leaving Egypt, the Medrash points out, is actually alluded to in the words of this verse itself. This verse itself, where Hashem told Moshe that you will come to serve God on this mountain that I appear to you on, and that would happen on the 50th day after the Jewish people left Egypt, that is alluded to in the word ta'avdun. When you take out this nation from Mitzrayim, ta'avdun, you shall worship God on this mountain. Now, actually, it would have been enough to say ta'avdu, you shall worship, without the nun sophist, without the end nun. Ta'avdu, which we spelled taf ayin, beis daled vav, ta'avdu, that's plural for you. You shall worship. That would have been enough. Why did the Torah add the nun at the end, ta'avdun? The answer is to allude to that the letter nun, the numerical value of the letter nun, is 50. Ta'avdun is alluding that you shall worship at 50. On the 50th day after leaving Egypt, that's when you will serve God on this mountain. That's when you will receive the Torah. Now, the question is, why did the Jewish people have to wait to receive the Torah? Why could they not receive the Torah right away? As soon as they left Egypt, maybe as soon as after the splitting of the Red Sea, the Egyptians were done with, why didn't they receive the Torah then? Why did they have to wait 50 days? Why did they have to wait 7 weeks later until they could receive the Torah? And to be able to appreciate the explanation, the Rambam Maimonides writes the following, and it's very powerful. The Rambam is writing this in his section of his halachic work, Yad HaChazaka, on the section about idol worship. Idol worship has halachic ramifications. But before the halachic ramifications, the Rambam gives us a history of idol worship, of pagan worship. Where did it come from? and how did things develop? How did things evolve? So the Rambam writes in short that the original idea of idol worship or worshiping the stars, the moon, actually it started worshiping the stars and the moon, the celestial bodies. It started there with the intent that the same way one gives honor to an officer of the king, the celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, the stars, the constellations, they are the servants to officers of God, and therefore they deserve honor too. From that eventually developed that instead of just worshiping, it was wrong to do that in itself, to worship the stars. We're only supposed to worship God. But that it started worshiping the stars as a means of worshiping God. It eventually took on a life of its own. They began worshiping the stars themselves. People who claimed to be the prophets of these stars started making images to bow down to, until, as the Rambam writes, everybody was thinking that everything else was God other than God himself. Until Abraham came along, and he came to the realization and understanding of the one God, and he was a prophet, and he began spreading the belief in God, and he had a very big following. And he passed on that job of spreading the belief in God, the belief of God, and of His will, which was the Torah, which they studied. He passed it on to his son Yitzchak, and Yitzchak passed it on to Yaakov. And Yaakov, as the Rambam writes, had a very large following. And I'll read to you now from the Rambam. And again, the belief and study of God, of the will of God, began to grow and increase amongst the children of Yaakov and all those who joined them. And it developed this nation that recognized God, the nation of Yaakov's children, plus all the others who came along with them, who joined up with them. This was all developing well until the Jewish people had stayed for a lengthy amount of time in Egypt. As we know, Yaakov and his sons went down to Egypt. From that eventually developed the bondage of the Jewish people, the Egyptians. And once the Jewish people had stayed for a lengthy time in Egypt, Chazru Lilmod Masayim. They began to learn from their actions. They began to learn from the actions of the Egyptians, who were pagan worshippers. And to worship the stars, Kamaisan, as they did. Chutz Meshevet Levi. The only ones who did it was the tribe of Levi. Tribe of Mitzvahs Avos, that they stood strong by the command of their ancestors. The Rambam points out the tribe of Levi never worshipped idols. And it was close to coming to the point that basically all the hard work that Avraham Avinu did to implant the belief in the one Creator God was about to be uprooted, was about to be lost. And the children of Yaakov, the children of Israel, were about to now revert back to the same fallacy that the rest of the world was living with. Because Hashem loved us. And he kept the oath that he made to Abraham. He brought about Moshe, the master of all prophets, and sent him. Once Moshe Rabbeinu prophesied, and Hashem chose the Jewish people as his special portion, and he took them out of Mitzrayim and gave them the Torah. He crowned them with commandments, and he let them know what is the way to worship him. And what will be the judgment? What will be the end of all of those what will be the judgment, the law of worshiping idols and those who stray after it? So the Rambam describes a very difficult situation the Jewish people found themselves in Egypt. They had sunk to such a low level of idol worship that what Avraham Avinu implanted in the world, the belief in one God, was about to be lost. And it was only because of God's love for us, as the descendants of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and the oath that he made to Abraham, he took us out of Egypt. And he made us his people. Okay. But the Jewish people, though, are going from a very low state of spirituality to becoming those who are going to receive the Torah. That doesn't happen. That can't happen automatically. That doesn't happen automatically. There needs to be a process by which the Jewish people elevate themselves, which the Jewish people purge themselves and cleanse themselves from the purity of Egypt, from the impurity of Egypt, from the impurity of the idol worship of Egypt that they became so steeped in. They had to now go through a process of coming out of it. Now, the level that the Jewish people sunk into because of idol worship, those levels are called Sharei Tuma, gates or levels of impurity. And the Kabbalists write that there are actually 50 levels. The 50th level is you're done, you're gone. There's no more hope for you. You are spiritually dead, and there's nothing that can be done for you more. The Jewish people slowly, over time, sunk to the level of the 49th level of impurity. Mem Teh Sharei Tuma. They felt the 49 levels, gates of impurity. And they're about to hit the 50th, if not for the fact that God took us out of Egypt. So the Jewish people had sunk to the 49th level of impurity. And now, in order to receive the Torah, God gave us a chance to receive the Torah, took us out of Egypt, He saved us. But now we have to go through the process of purifying themselves, of picking us up out of those 49 levels of impurity and bringing us back to a level of purity that we should be able to receive the Torah. And therefore, we could not receive the Torah immediately. We had to go through a process of cleansing ourselves. And we had to go through the process of cleansing ourselves out of the 49 levels. And that process took place 49 days between Pesach and Shavuos. Each day, we rose out of another level of impurity. And after we got out of the 49th level on the 50th day, we were able to receive the Torah. So therefore, that is the answer why we couldn't receive the Torah right away. And we also have an explanation why 49 days. We have 49 days because each day we took ourselves out from a level of spiritual impurity. Now, the commentary of the Orach Chaim in Parshas Emor, by the mitzvah of Sefirat HaOmer, the Torah gives us the mitzvah to count the days of the Omer. The Orach Chaim explains this idea in the following way. He explains it based on a Zohar that says that the Jewish people, as we mentioned, were in a state of impurity from Egypt. Now, the Zohar compares, makes an analogy of the Jewish people receiving the Torah from God like a wedding between God and the Jewish people. When Hashem gave the Torah to the Jewish people, God and the Jewish people were to be wed to one another. They're supposed to unite and become one. And the same way before a man and a woman can become married and unite as one, the woman has to purify herself from impurity. She has to purify herself from the impurity that comes from menstruating, from the blood of Nida, from being a Nida. And there is a process of 7 clean days that a Nida has to go through in order to be able to now become fully married to her husband and unite with him. The same process, or a similar process, so to speak, had to take place between the Jewish people and God. The Jewish people had to now purify themselves, make themselves pure. And just as a woman makes herself pure to her husband by going through 7 clean days, she has to go through a cycle, a unit of 7 days. The Jewish people also now had to go through a 7-day, they had to go through a cycle of 7. Similarly to the woman, to a cycle of 7 to be able now to become wed to God through the Torah. Now, as Orach Chaim points out, in the case of people, a woman only needs 7 days. Here, it was 7 weeks. That's what Torah tells us. When you count the Omer, Tisperu Shiva Shavuos Tisparlach, you shall count for yourself 7 weeks. It's 7 times 7. It's not just like a woman, 1 unit of 7. It's 7 times that. That, he says, is because, number one, we're talking about a much more severe level of impurity that the Jewish people had. And we're also talking about the entire Jewish people, not just an individual. And therefore, God in his ultimate wisdom understood that for us to purify ourselves to unite with God through the Torah, we have to go through 7 cycles of 7. Now, the HaOmer also points out, and this could be something that's bothering you, well, that was then. That was then when the Jewish people had to receive the Torah. They had to go through a purification process. We already received the Torah. Why do we have to now count the 50? Why do we have to now count the Omer? And the HaOmer himself, says, although this took place by the Pesach of Egypt, okay. Although this was taking place at the Pesach that took place in Egypt, the very first Pesach, we are told during this same time, every year you do the same thing. And the HaOmer doesn't elaborate on that. But perhaps the explanation is that the Derech Hashem writes that when we every year celebrate Pesach, we're not just commemorating a past event. We are constantly going through a cycle of time. We come back to the same time. Basically, time is a cycle. It's a circuit, and it has different stations on it. And we stop at those same stations as the very first time. The very first time Pesach took place, at this point of time, we come back to that same time. And when we come to Shavuos, we come back to that same time. We are experiencing receiving the Torah just as our ancestors did. Now, they did it standing at Mount Sinai, seeing all the miracles. We receive it in a more quiet way, whatever way you would describe that. It's not as obvious, not in such an obvious way. But we too, again, we are always receiving the Torah every Shavuos. And therefore, from Pesach to Shavuos, we have to cleanse and purify ourselves and get ourselves ready to receive the Torah on Shavuos. So with this, we actually have an explanation as to why, when it comes to the mitzvah of Sefirat HaOmer, that we count weeks. We know the mitzvah of Sefira, when we count Sefira, we have to count the days, the 49 days, and the 7 weeks. So with this HaOmer, we understand, we can have an explanation why the Torah wants us to count weeks, because we are counting the cycles. The same way a woman who becomes purifying herself has to be aware of her 7 days, well, we have to be aware of our 7 cycles of 7 days. We have to be aware of all those weeks. Not only have to be aware of them, we have to count them. And that's a big difference between the Sefira, the counting of 7 days that a woman does, and what we do. Because what we do, we actually have to count. We have to delineate the number of the day. A woman doesn't have to do that. We have to actually count the day. And we'll suggest a reason for that soon. But the Torah tells us count the weeks. That corresponds to the 7 cycles of the unit of 7. That's a unit of purification. And we count days, 49 days, based on what we said before. That corresponds to the ability that we have to elevate ourselves, that we have to raise ourselves out of in order to receive the Torah. Now, as I just mentioned, when it comes to Sefira, we have to actually count. And perhaps we have to actually count because by a woman, she just has to be aware of what's happening over those 7 days to be clean. Right? It's something that's going to happen. If she is clean, there's no more blood, then she's okay. This is something that basically, happens, and she has to check to make sure that it's happening, that she's becoming clean. But for us, it's a different ballgame. It's not that we become clean over this time. We have to cleanse ourselves. We have to do the cleaning. And therefore, we have to actually declare and count the number and remind ourselves and awaken ourselves that we are going through a process of cleansing ourselves in order to receive the Torah. So what we have here right now is an explanation of the counting of the Omer, that it's a process of cleansing ourselves from the impurity of the idol worship of Egypt and all its effects in order to become united with God, receiving his Torah, as a man and woman become united in marriage. Now I want to share with you what would seem to be another explanation to what the meaning of the counting of the Omer is. And this explanation starts from the commentary of Rabbeinu Nissen, who was very Rishon from the early commentaries. And he writes, discussing regarding the mitzvah of counting the Omer. The Torah commands us to count the Omer. It's a Torah obligation. The question is nowadays that we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, that perhaps now the mitzvah is not a Torah obligation, because the Torah tells us, but the Torah doesn't tell us count from the second day of Pesach to Shavuos. The Torah basically tells us count from the day that the Omer carbon. The Omer was a sacrifice. It was a meal sacrifice. It was flour. It was made from flour, from barley flour. That sacrifice was called the Omer. That Omer was offered on the second day of Pesach. But the Torah doesn't say count from the second day of Pesach. The Torah says count from the bringing of the Omer until you bring 50 days later another meal offering, another offering made from flour, which were actually 2 loaves of bread of wheat, which were brought on Shavuos. But the Torah tells us to count from the Omer, not to count from the second day of Pesach, to count from the Omer. When we don't have the Omer sacrifice anymore, because we don't have the Beis HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, to bring the sacrifices, do we still have the mitzvah to count or not? Now we know that we do this, we count. But is it a Torah obligation, or is it a Rabbanan? Is it a rabbinic obligation? So the Ran writes, according to most opinions, counting the Omer nowadays is a rabbinic obligation. And he supports this from the Talmud in Menachos, the Gemara in Menachos, that calls counting the Omer Zecher LaMikdash, a commemoration to what took place in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. That is what we're doing nowadays. Then the Ran brings a medrash. And the medrash says like this. When Moshe delivered this message to the Jewish people, of you shall worship God on this mountain. Amru lo Yisrael, the Jewish people said to him, Moshe Rabbeinu, our master Moshe, when is this worship of God going to take place? Amar lahem l'seif chamishim yom, 50 days after you leave. And each Jewish person, when they left Egypt, was counting each day because they were so excited. They wanted so much to receive the Torah that every day they counted the days getting closer to receiving the Torah. That's how much they wanted the Torah. Based on this, the sages instituted counting the Omer. Kolomar. So the Ran explains, what does this mean? Nowadays that we have no sacrifices, when we count 50 days, we're counting it to the Simchas HaTorah, to the joyous day of receiving the Torah. As the Jewish people counted in that time. That's what the Medrash says. The Medrash says from here, according to where the Ran cites the Medrash, based on the fact that they were counting the Torah on their own, the sages instituted will also count. Just as they counted in order because of their anticipation of receiving the Torah, that's what we do nowadays also. But that's rabbinic. But then the Ran says, but that's a midrashic interpretation. The real interpretation, or the primary interpretation of why nowadays we count the Omer is, as the Talmud says, Zecher LaMikdash, to commemorate what took place in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Nonetheless, there is also another aspect, another dimension of counting Sphira, again, from the point of the rabbi's institution of continuing this mitzvah when the Torah doesn't mandate it anymore, and that is to do like they did, to count the days in anticipation of the giving of the Torah. And actually, the Sefer HaChinuch, which is a sefer that explains, that enumerates the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah and explains them, the Sefer HaChinuch, when he writes the meaning behind the counting of the Omer, he writes, the purpose of the Jewish people, the purpose of the world is the Torah. And the goal, the purpose of leaving Egypt was to receive the Torah and to fulfill it. Being that this was the goal of the Jewish people, the purpose of the redemption from Egypt, and the reason that they attained all the greatness that they did. We have a mitzvah, we're commanded to count from the day after the first day of Pesach until the giving of the Torah. We now show how much we desire and anticipate and yearn for this for the great and honorable day. When you count towards something, when you have a countdown, that shows how much you want to get to that final point. And therefore, the point of counting Sefirat is this idea of showing our yearning to receive the Torah. And this is what we do every year. So we could understand that this explanation given by the Ran is another interpretation to the meaning behind counting the 50 days. It doesn't say by 50, but we're counting to show our yearning to receive the Torah. However, the Rambam's opinion, the opinion of Maimonides is that even nowadays counting the Sefirat is a Torah obligation, not a rabbinic obligation, a Torah obligation. Now, the question is how to understand it. Because the Torah does tell us to count from the bringing of the HaOmer. If there's no more HaOmer, why? What would be the understanding to say that we still have a Torah obligation to count Sefirat, to count the HaOmer? So the Aruch HaShulchan writes the following to explain. And he says that actually, although the Torah told us to count from the bringing of the HaOmer carbon, and now we don't have a carbon, nonetheless, that the main point of Sefirat always, even when we were bringing it from the point of bringing the HaOmer, was actually a count towards receiving the Torah. As the Medrash says, the Jewish people on their own were counting. The Rebbe had a reason why he wanted this counting to receiving the Torah to basically be bookmarked to start off with bringing the HaOmer carbon that was brought, and then which was brought from barley, and the wheat sacrifice that was brought, the 2 loaves of wheat bread that were brought on what we call Shavuos. We find in the Talmud that barley is animal food. Wheat is human food. Therefore, at the beginning, what Hashem wanted, I'm sorry, make sure I have the right thing. Right. So he writes, the Hashem wanted the counting to start from the HaOmer of barley and to end with the offering of wheat, to show that without the Torah, we were like animals who eat barley food. And once they received the Torah, that is when they took on being man. And therefore on Shavuos, the carbon is from wheat, which is human food. And therefore the Torah said, count from the carbon and to the carbon. But the main intent was to count towards the giving of the Torah, and therefore the mitzvah applies nowadays also. So the Aruch HaShulchan is saying like this. According to the Rambam says that we still have a Torah obligation to count Sefirat. The question is, but how do we understand that? The Torah said to count from the bringing of the HaOmer. Says the Aruch HaShulchan that even when the Torah told us to count from the HaOmer, from the carbon, from the HaOmer sacrifice, the main point of counting was to count in anticipation of receiving the Torah. The reason why the Torah said start that process from bringing the HaOmer carbon was because since the HaOmer was brought from barley, and barley is animal food, it is to teach us that before we received the Torah, we were at a level like animals. We were mundane like animals. And once we received the Torah, then we attained the status of human beings. But the point of the counting was always anticipating the receiving of the Torah. So therefore, even if we don't have sacrifices, we can still count. It makes sense to count, and that's the Rambam's opinion. The Torah wanted us to count from the Omer carbon to the Shtei Alechem carbon, from the Omer barley carbon to the wheat loaves, the two wheat loaves of Shavuos, to bring out this point that we started from a point of being mundane like animals, and now we, through the Shulchan, is telling us that again, the point of counting the Omer is an anticipation of the Torah. But in the words of the Aruch HaShulchan, the fact that he says the Torah wanted us to realize that we went from animals to human beings is that there was an elevation process here. We went from leaving Egypt and being in this lowly state to a higher state once we received the Torah. So the days in between, according to the way the Aruch HaShulchan explains, if we're going from animal to human, so there was that process of going from animal to human took place over these 49 days. There was a process that was taking place. And that process could very well be the process that we said before from Orach Hayim. It was, again, the process was for us to cleanse ourselves from the impurity of Egypt. But at the same time, if we're based on the Medrash that said that they were doing it in anticipation, so then we have to now put together the going from animal to human and the anticipation towards that, which means the Jewish people were anticipating, were eager to go from this lowly level to the higher level. And in that anticipation and eagerness to receive the Torah, they understood they have to go through a cleansing process. We can put everything together, it can all come together. We have a process of going from a low spiritual state like an animal, of being mundane like an animal, and then reaching the highest level of a human being through Torah. The Jewish people eagerly anticipated that. And that was the basis for the sages to institute, even if there is no, again, if you hold like the other opinions that there is no Torah obligation. If there was a Torah obligation, then again, we're just doing the same counting as originally, which again was an anticipation towards the receiving of the Torah. And as the Chinuch says, that's what we're doing. We're counting in anticipation and eagerness to receive the Torah. But that counting was a counting of going from animal to human. It was the eagerness to reach that higher level by receiving the Torah. And it was understood that in order to do that, they have to go through a process of cleansing. And actually, the eagerness, the desire that they had to receive the Torah, there's a good chance it gave them that motivation to cleanse themselves. It inspired them. It strengthened them to cleanse themselves because they wanted it so badly. They wanted to reach that level so badly. So what we have here in summary is really a number of ways that all can come together in how to look at counting the Omer. We're counting the Omer, we're counting up. It's a process of elevation. It's a process that, number one, as the Gemara says, again, if you follow the opinions that the mitzvah of counting the Omer is rabbinic in nature nowadays, it's Eichel HaMikdash, to remember what we did in times of the Beis HaMikdash, when we counted from the bringing of the Omer to the bringing of the Shtei Alechem, the 2 wheat breads on Shavuos. We have another meaning. We have another way, another approach, another dimension of Sefirat, which is, as the Sefer Chinuch says, the anticipation towards receiving the Torah. And as the Medrash says, that they yearned so much to receive the Torah that they, on their own, they counted every day till they came to that point. And that could be another basis why the rabbis instituted counting Sefirat. Or, according to the Rambam, Aruch HaShulchan says, it was always the basis. It was always the meaning behind counting. Just that, the counting that was taking place was a counting that Hashem wanted us to realize that we were going from a level of being mundane like an animal to reaching the highest levels of being a human through Torah. And in order to get to all that, in order to be able to accomplish that, we have to cleanse ourselves. If we want to be able to reach that highest level of humanity, which allows us to unite with God and to become one with him, there's a cleansing process that has to be done. That was a process that had to happen to the Jewish people the first time. It's a process that has to happen to us. In order for us to receive the Torah anew, in order for us to merit, for God to give us the potential to be able to, throughout the year, from one Shavuos to another, to be able to study Torah and understand Torah and to internalize Torah, to make Torah part of us, so that we become the people of the Torah, so that we can unite with God. That happens every year, and for that to happen every year, we have to cleanse ourselves, as the Jewish people did the first time. So when we count Sefirat, we are counting up. We're elevating ourselves. We're commemorating what was done in the times of the Beis Hamikdash. We are showing our yearning to receive the Torah. We're understanding that we're going from the mundane level of an animal to the highest level of humanity to be able to receive the Torah. And we do that to make sure that every day we go through the process of cleansing ourselves and purifying ourselves so that we should merit to receive the Torah. And what is that cleansing process? What is it that we have to do during these days to prepare ourselves, to cleanse ourselves, to make ourselves worthy of receiving God's Torah and uniting with him? That, Rich Hashem, will discuss tomorrow night. Have a good night and a good night.